combines her gardening and cooking skills with an extensive knowledge of history, plant lore, and seasonal celebrations. Her gardens, floral work, and retail shop have been featured in the New York Times, The American Gardener, Victoria, Better Homes and Gardens, and many, many others. She's the author of articles and books on the uses and stories of herbs and flowers, currently working on a third edition of her herb cookbook called Mrs. Thrift Cooks. She's appeared on the Discovery Channel and Greater Boston cable stations, as well as local and national radio shows. She lectures and teaches locally and nationally, and she is the consultant to the Memorial Hall Library's Seed Library in Andover. And she has generously offered to help us with our seed library here in Rockport. In 1987, she created the first fairy festival, which sounds so intriguing and has been replicated throughout the country. She was a founding member of the International Herb Association and served on its gardening board for 6 years. She has been given the International Herb Association Award for her outstanding contributions to the herb industry. And so I'm just going to let Betsy take it away. We're so glad to have you here today, Betsy.
Quite enough of all of that. So.
And Betsy's recipes are online on our site, on our website, on the first page. If you haven't already downloaded them, you might wish to do so. And we will wait and have questions for Betsy after she makes her presentation. So if everybody wants to mute themselves, and we'll let Betsy take it away.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Carrie. It's been fun being part of your meeting. I miss going to garden club meetings and hearing what garden clubs are doing. And this is a whole different way of life, but this is reasonably satisfying on Zoom. It's not quite as satisfying as being there in person. But however, if I was there in person, being the Luddite that I am, and I hope you all know what a Luddite is, I would have available for you with a very pretty cover, which I decided didn't need to go on your website, this packet of recipes. And I would be suggesting that as I'm talking and demonstrating, and I'm going to do a little bit of demonstrating, a lot of talking, but as I'm talking and demonstrating, that you use this to take notes on in case you want to go ahead and use any of these recipes to make Christmas gifts, because that's been the focus of what I have planned for you. There are many, many other things that you can do with your herbs over a period of time, but we have exactly 15 days left until Christmas. And in those 15 days, if indeed you're going to be making any gifts, pretty much everything on this list that I have sent you, this collection that I've sent you, can be made, packaged, and presented in time for Christmas giving. That being said, I would like to remind all of you that it's only been in recent times that Christmas was a day. And you have 12 glorious days between Christmas Day itself and 12th night or Epiphany, January 6th. 12 glorious days, according to really 1,500-year-old tradition, to make your gifts and deliver them. So you can just keep on giving for all that period of time and enjoy doing it. And I just picturing so many of you going, oh, well, maybe I could do a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And you can package things up in a beautiful way and then do a drive about and leave things on people's doorsteps, ring the bell and run and pretend it's May Day, because that's about what we have to do this year. And I also based my selection on the fact that you are extremely lucky human beings, because you live in Rockport and you've got common crow in Gloucester, because most of the ingredients that these recipes call for, especially when it comes to the dried ones, you will find at Common Crow. And I happen to be a big fan of Common Crow. I'm there at least once a month, if not every 2 weeks, because it's one of the few really marvelous, um, what Whole Food used to be and what here in Andover, used to have a store like Common Crow, but it's long gone, and Whole Foods is no longer what it used to be. So Common Crow is a treasure in your midst, and I hope that you go there on a regular basis. It's just a marvelous place. Anyway, so did
Betsy,
some,
before you start, could I just interrupt and ask, there's a bunch of people that have not muted and we're getting a lot of noise. So if you could mute your computer.
Sorry, I tried to mute twice. What do I need to do that I'm not doing?
Down, well, I don't know, what are you on?
I'm on,
A computer?
now she's muted.
Should be, if you're on a
She's now
computer,
muted.
I'm unmuted.
Now
It
she's
says
unmuted.
no, you want to be muted.
If you're on Zoom, you should go to the left-hand side, take your cursor way over to the left-hand side where you see the little icon for a speaker.
And you can mute it all the way down at the bottom, lower left corner.
Yeah, and click on that, and there should be a little red line that comes up.
No, I'm sorry. I don't have, I'm not using a mouse or anything. I just have my screen.
Okay, then maybe there's a way you can,
She did mute briefly and then she unmuted. So when you started talking to her, Sherry, there she's muted. She's muted. Whatever she's done, she's muted.
I did that. I muted her.
Okay.
Okay. We ready? That would be a nod, yes, because every. All right, now I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, okay, here goes. The first thing I'm going to demonstrate for you and talk about is herb butter. And herb butter may seem like a strange gift to give, but it truly isn't. Herb butter is a treasure to have. It's so easy to make. It's so expensive to buy. You can easily make several pounds of herb butter in an hour to an hour and a half period, package them up, put them in your freezer, and distribute them as wonderful Christmas remembrances to people, or package them up in an, if you want to do a basket of herbal treats, have a little packet of frozen herb butter in there. If you decide to make herb butter, this is the butter that I recommend, unless you want to buy an organic butter or one of the imported butters. And that decision is up to you, but I choose this one to use in programs and in my home. This is Kate's Butter from Maine for several reasons. One is that this is a locally made butter. This truly, honestly is made in Maine. And that's important to me at this point in my life. Secondly, this is still in the affordable range. Market Basket, and you've got a nice Market Basket there in Gloucester. Market Basket carries Kate's Butter for, the last time I looked, was $4.39 for a pound. It is not marked organic, but it is all local, Maine raised cows and made in Maine also. So $4.39, as opposed to a pound of organic butter, which can take you up to $7 or $8 a pound, and anywhere between $5 and $7 to $8 a pound. Anything less than that, when you get into lower priced butters, you're getting into a butter that actually has a very different flavor to it. And I believe strongly that when you're going to make something like herb butter, which is a treasure and a treat to have, that you want to buy the best quality butter that your budget allows. So that being said, it's Kate's butter in this particular household. Now, oh, I know what I completely forgot to put on the table for you. So I may just talk through this. The easiest way to make herb butter is to simply take your pound of butter, set it out on the kitchen counter, and let it sit there for 2 or 3 hours and reach the point of softness that you like, that is easily mashed with a fork. And that is exactly what I forgot to put on the kitchen table. My kitchen table was a fork. So if you can make herb butter. You do not have to plug anything in. You do not have to wash any major utensils. You do not have to haul out your food processor. All you need is softened butter, a bowl, a nice kitchen fork, which would be nice to have, and a few fresh herbs or a few dried herbs. Now, the herb butter that I made today and that I'm going to be demonstrating to you now, and I'm going to push this down so you can see a little bit further. Can everybody see now?
Yeah,
Yes, okay. Is a winter butter. I'm planning on using a combination of sage, which I just picked from the garden. And I don't know about you over there, because I haven't been over there in a couple of weeks, but we have about 3 inches of snow on the ground here. And so my thyme is completely buried. So is my parsley. I expect the parsley to pop up over the weekend, but the thyme has pretty much had it for the year. And the sage is fine. I pushed the snow and ice off the sage this morning, and the rosemary is in good shape because I brought it in when it started to get really cold, and it's happily living in the kitchen. So I'm able to harvest some fresh rosemary. This will be a winter butter, and I am simply going to chop a little bit of fresh sage, chop a little bit of fresh rosemary. The rule of thumb that I use for making herb butter, and typically is used for making herb butter, is 1 to 2 tablespoons of fresh chopped herbs to a pound of butter. Now, I like things to taste a little bit stronger than that. So I tend to add a few extra herbs. And herb butter really doesn't come into its own until it hits the heat. Herb butter is not anything that you want to spread on your toast in the morning, at least I don't. But it is definitely something that you want to finish off a steak with, a nice blob of herb butter, a pork chop, even a burger right off the grill or out of the pan, a piece of fish, definitely something you want to make scrambled eggs with, definitely something you want to use on steamed vegetables. And so I like to have a little bit of extra flavor, because once these herbs hit the heat, all of the volatile oils that are contained in the leaves of the fresh herbs will be released. And your nose will tell you that that's happening, and your mouth, when you taste the dish that you're using the herb butter in will also tell you that that's happening. Now, if you don't want to chop, you can use an old coffee grinder like this, which I paid $5 for about 10 years ago at a garage sale, and have been using it to grind herbs and spices ever since. And this does a beautiful job of, and I did this to show you, a beautiful job of grinding herbs and still, but not pulverizing them, not turning them into something that is total mush, but really still has a lot of fragrance to it. You take your chopped herbs or your freshly ground herbs, you sprinkle it on your butter. And in this case, I am going to add a little bit of dried thyme. This is a winter butter. These are winter flavored herbs. And I'm just going to add a pinch. I might add 2 pinches of dried thyme to that, because I didn't have access to my fresh thyme. And then I'm going to peel a clove of garlic, and 1 to 3 cloves of garlic, depending on per pound, depending on your preference. If you happen to adore garlic, then add more. If you decide you want 4 cloves of garlic, so be it. It's your herb butter and your mouth that's going to enjoy it, or your friend's mouth, if your friend happens to love garlic and you're giving this as a gift. I press my garlic with a nice old garlic press like this and squeeze it in just like that. And I don't want to miss a bit of this. And this is my garlic, by the way. It's very easy to grow garlic. If you all have not tried it, I would highly recommend trying it. And as long as you can get into the soil, it's not too late to plant garlic. And then a squeeze of lemon. This squeeze of lemon, and you can use lime if you want, or if you don't have lemon or you don't have lime, you can use a few drops of your favorite vinegar, but that helps to offset the full fat taste and brings the flavors of the herbs out of the butter and really helps to accent all the flavors in there. Because I forgot to put the fork on the table, and I'm not going to get up and get it at this point, you just have to imagine that I've taken the fork, mashed up my butter. Once it's all mashed and completely mixed together, you can package it. Now, this container, which you can easily find in any supermarket, this plastic container will hold 3/4 of a pound of herb butter. And this is the butter, the rest of that pound of butter that I made this morning. This is a much smaller container, obviously, and it will hold about 1/4 of a pound of butter. And this would make a nice container to package butter in as a gift. But this one, which I really like a lot because it's a Pyrex dish, this will hold a good 1.5 pounds of butter. And if you have a friend who you know loves butter, I would fill this right to the brim with your favorite combination of herbs. And by the way, if you happen to like garlic and you have a friend who absolutely adores garlic bread and smothering everything in her life with garlic, make her a big batch of garlic butter. And you can just pop this right off, put it in the middle of the table, put some spreading knives in it, and people can have a wonderful go at a nice dinner, assuming that they can all get together to do that. This will store beautifully in the freezer. All butter will store beautifully in the freezer. When you read instructions online or in some cookbooks about making herb butter, you will usually see something at the end of that particular article or particular recipe that says use within a certain number of days. If you keep the herb butter in the refrigerator or on the kitchen counter, indeed, you want to use it up fairly quickly. But if you put your butter in the freezer, it will keep for up to a year or more. And every time you want to use herb butter, all you have to do is reach in the freezer, pop the top, shake your butter out, whack off the piece that you'd like, put the frozen butter back in its container and back in the freezer. It's simple, it's fun, it's inexpensive, it's easy, and it's totally delicious. And if all of you are doing what we do here now, and all of my family does, you're spending lots of time at home and you're spending a lot more time in the kitchen. Treat yourself to herb butter so that you have it when you're making a dish and you want something a little bit different, something that just, we deserve to have our food taste good. And herb butter is a really easy way of doing that. You can get butter that's salted and you get butter that's unsalted. The classic herb butter, the old-fashioned classic herb butter, was always unsalted. And the reason for that is that herb butter was always summer butter. Winter butter was always salted because it needed to be kept for a long period of time. But summer butter was never salted. And typically, if you go back into old cookbooks, you will find recipes calling for flavored butters that are pretty much done in the summertime. Today, you can use either salted butter or unsalted butter, whatever works best for you and works best in your household for making your herb butter. It doesn't matter, and there's no rule that says that you have to use unsalted butter. So now, see, this is where I'd love to say any questions, but we'll save them all to the very end. Next thing to talk about on your list of recipes that you have there is salt. And herb salt can be purchased in little containers in specialty food stores for considerable sums of money, or, you know, a not inexpensive amount. But you can easily make your own herb salt at home. Both of these are fine. You can buy fine sea salt and coarse sea salt. I highly recommend, and it is highly recommended, that you use sea salt rather than Morton salt or any iodinized salt for making herb salt. It's a much better flavor and it's a much better salt. And it's plus sea salt, as I'm sure all of you know, is packed full of minerals that mined salt sometimes do not have. You can begin with either a coarse or a fine salt. It really doesn't matter. There are 3 different ways to make herb salt. I gave you 2 of them, 2 quick ways to make herb salt. One is to And this is here. Let me see if I can show you here. One is to, there, that's some herb salt that's already been made. One is to use fresh herbs to make herb salt. And you use the fresh herbs by grinding them in a grinder. Pretty much at this time of the year, the fresh herbs you would have available to you would again be the winter herbs: rosemary, parsley, sage, thyme. Those you might have in your garden, those you might have available from a local source. But you can also add to that grinding of fresh herbs if you would like to. You can add basil. You can, from a bunch of basil from Market Basket. You can add dill. You could add cilantro, any of those things. You can make a single flavored herb salt with just rosemary. You can make just rosemary. You can make a single flavored herb salt with just sage or thyme or parsley, or you can do a blended herb salt. But however you do it, you have the recipe for making herb salt with fresh herbs. And that involves taking a small amount of salt, putting it in a grinder of some kind, a blender or a grinder of some kind, grinding up the herbs that you've chosen to use in that salt, and then taking that salt, about a quarter of a cup of salt, and spreading it in a pan, and then adding a full cup of fine ground, or you could use the coarse ground if you'd like to, salt. Mix it all together and put that pan in a 125-degree oven. If you cannot regulate your oven down to 125 degrees, I would suggest that you don't do this, because if you get the salt and the freshly ground herbs in that salt if you have to set your temperature at 150 or even 200, you're going to volatilize most of the essential oil in your fresh herbs and lose a great deal of flavor. So this is for ovens that you can get down to 125 degrees. Or if you are like me, and remember I told you I was a Luddite, and still happen to have an oven with a gas oven with a pilot light, you can put a tray of freshly made herb salt that has been created using freshly ground herbs. You can put that tray or that pan of salt in an oven with a pilot light and leave it there for 3 or 4 days, and it will dry perfectly. But otherwise, you could try to find some spot in the house, and only you would know where that was, where you could maintain a constant temperature of 100 to 125 degrees. And that's what you need to keep the oils from volatilizing in a fresh herb. No? Was there a question? You're okay? All right. You can also do herb salt with dried herbs, and that is a layered salt. And that is probably at this time of year, if you're going to give this gifts, the easiest possible thing to do. I use the fine salt, and I use the fine ground salt, fine ground sea salt, because it goes through a salt shaker very easily. And it's nice to give a gift of a jar of herb salt and a pretty salt shaker to go with it. Or if you use the coarse ground, then give a gift as a jar of herb salt with a little salt dish to go with it, and a tiny little spoon if you can find one. But begin your layered herb salt in a canning jar with a good screw top lid, just a standard canning jar. And then these are dried herbs that I dried this summer. And I just took them out of their various bottles. There's whole sage here. There's basil, there's mint, there's thyme, there's parsley. There's no rosemary in here just because I don't have rosemary dried. And I put that into this mortar and pestle and pounded and pounded and pounded with a mortar and pestle, which was actually kind of fun, until I ended up with this. And this, I'm going to put a layer of dried herb right there. And then I'm going to put a layer of salt on top of that. I'm going to put a layer of dried herb here, all nicely pulverized, and then another layer of salt, and just keep going until you have the jar completely filled with salt, alternating layers of salt and dried herb until you get to the very top of your jar, and then carefully close it. And that should be allowed to sit once it's full, and you can see all those layers in there. Once it's full, this should be allowed to sit for a good 2 weeks, if possible, before you shake it all up. And you've got herb salt ready to go into a salt cellar, salt shaker, or into a salt dish, whichever you prefer to use on your table. You don't have to use the mortar and pestle. The reason that I use the mortar and pestle to chop up those herbs, to pulverize these dried herbs, freshly dried herbs. The reason that I did that was because I wanted to keep them, I didn't want them to turn completely to powder. I wanted to keep a little bit of form to them. But when you dry your herbs, next summer, next spring, when you begin drying your herbs, you want to keep them as whole as possible while you're drying them. And once you store them, you want to keep them as whole as possible until you use them. That preserves the fragrance and the flavor. That keeps the oils in the leaves, those essential oils that give all herbs their fragrance and flavor and medicinal benefits too, actually, keeps them in the leaves until you begin pounding and releasing that. So these canning jars, I think, are darling and make very nice gifts with a nice label on the top, maybe some recipes to go along with it that you're particularly fond of. This is another nice way to package them in that size canning jar. And I know canning jars have been hard to find this year, but you know where you can look. And that's that wonderful secondhand store that I cannot remember the name of it now, across the street from Common Crow. That marvelous place is just, oh, what a treasure trove that
Second
is.
glance.
You guys, yes, and you guys, second glance, yes. You guys are so lucky to have those things there. I have a sister in Annisquam, so I come over and go shopping. This is an herb flavored sugar. And this is another nice thing to make. And this is a lovely jar to present it in, this kind of a canning jar. And herb sugar is very simple to make. There's several different kinds of sugars out there. There's white sugar, there's turbinado sugar, there's demerara sugar, there's the Florida crystals. So you have your choice basically these days of 4, assuming that the sugar is still on the shelf, of 4 different kinds of table sugar to choose from if you're going to make an herb sugar. And it's easy to make an herb sugar. You should not expect a great deal of intense flavor in an herb sugar. Herb sugars are used to finish cookies, to sprinkle on desserts, and to add a little bit of extra flavor. But they're fun to make and they're fun to present. And the classic one, the most classic of all, is a vanilla sugar. And vanilla is definitely an herb. You can take a whole vanilla bean, pack it in a jar with sugar, and let it sit. But you do need to let it sit for several weeks for the flavors to develop. So at this time of year, that's not going to work too well if this is a Christmas gift. If it's an Easter gift, or a springtime gift, that's a different matter, but even a Valentine's gift. But it's not going to work too well for Christmas unless you suggest to the recipient, if you want to do a vanilla sugar, and there's nothing quicker than a vanilla sugar, unless you suggest to the recipient that they put it on their shelf and not look at it until Valentine's Day. Another, oh, bless you, another strong tasting sugar, and you get a really strong flavor from that. Another strong tasting sugar you can make is with fresh coffee beans. And you can actually pack fresh coffee beans into a container of sugar, always with a screw top to keep, the screw top is very important. That keeps moisture out. And boy, do you want to keep that moisture out. But coffee beans work very well. When it comes to what we think of as common herbs, rosemary is excellent. And you can treat the sugar the same way you would treat a fresh herb salt. You can take a little bit of sugar and some rosemary and grind it up together, spread it out in a warm place to dry, and then mix the sugar in with it and get a close to instant rosemary sugar, which if any of you are shortbread makers, is absolutely delicious sprinkled on rosemary shortbread or any kind of shortbread for that matter. Lavender is another one, and it should be organic lavender, and that you can get at Common Crow, or at least the last time I've been there, they've had it available. Organic dried lavender will give you a pretty good fragrance and flavor in a short period of time, mixed in with sugar. Organic dried rose petals will do the same thing and give you a nice rosy sugar. And it could be a lot of fun to make an entire series, a whole grouping, just as the way it would be fun to make an entire grouping of salts in small jars, a rosemary salt, a thyme salt, a sage salt, a basil salt, all in small jars that you gave as you could give it as a flight of salts or a flight of sugar. But this is just plain white sugar in here. We use turbinado sugar in this house. And I decided to make this I used with lemon verbena leaves last summer. So this is all ready to go because it's been sitting on the shelf since, I guess, since probably, I didn't date it, but probably the end of August. It's been sitting on the shelf and it's time to use it now in the holiday season. Now, next, let's talk about vinegars. And I happen to be a vinegar person. I love vinegars. So let's talk about vinegars. Herb vinegar, again, something that you can go to a gourmet store and pay quite a bit of money for, but you can easily make at home and reasonably quickly. So that's why I included it. There are many vinegars on your grocery shelves that will work well for herb vinegars. Definitely, as you go down the aisles in Market Basket or Shaw's or you will find apple cider vinegar, you will find organic apple cider vinegar, you will find red wine vinegar from at least 2 different companies, probably 3. You will find what's called white balsamic vinegar, which basically is a mislabeling. You will find white vinegar and you will find rice wine vinegar. The one vinegar you do not want to use in your kitchen, if you can possibly help it with that I can think of, is white vinegar. Vinegars are made in 2 different ways. They are either fermented or distilled. All fruit vinegars are fermented vinegars. White vinegar is a distilled vinegar. Our human bodies are built to digest, enjoy, and use to the greatest benefit fermented things, fermented vinegars in that category. The distilled vinegar does not work well in the human body. So if you have white vinegar in your kitchen, even if it says organic, use that in the way that it's intended to be used. And that is to clean your cupboards, scrub your woodwork, use to clean your coffee pot, run it through your washing machine to get rid of soap scum. Or if you're as old-fashioned as I am, but I don't have any kids or even grandkids left to wash their hair, you can rinse hair with vinegar and it will give your hair the most incredible shine going. And that white vinegar is excellent for that too. But for making something that you're going to ingest, try, if you possibly can do it, to stick to fermented vinegars coming from a vegetable source. Rice vinegar comes from a grain, but it's still fermented. The white vinegar comes these days as being identified as coming from corn or wheat. It can also be made from wood pulp. Any kind of cellulose you can make a distilled vinegar from. But if you read labels on your grocery aisles, on your vinegar section, you will see that almost every white vinegar is now labeled as coming from wheat or corn. Doesn't mean that it's good for you. It just means that's where it's coming from, but it's still distilled. This is a white wine vinegar. I get it at Trader Joe's. It used to be labeled balsamic until Trader Joe's was reminded that you can't have a white balsamic vinegar. It doesn't exist. So they changed the name to white Modena vinegar. This is a very nice white wine vinegar. It's only $2.29 a bottle. You absolutely cannot go wrong from a budget perspective. It has a lovely flavor to it. It is 6%, and you want 5 to 6% acid in your vinegar. This is a 6%, I believe, but it's had a tiny little bit of grape must added to it. And grape must is the first pressing of a grape, and it's very sweet. So there's a tiny bit of sweetness to this vinegar. As I say, it's a very nice vinegar, and it's my vinegar of choice for all of the herb vinegars that I make. And I make herb vinegar on a regular basis all summer long, and actually all year long, because I do use a lot of vinegar. And I don't know if any of you use vinegar in your cooking, but these days, as you're cooking more and more than you perhaps used to do in the past, consider using a good herb vinegar, preferably one that you've made, for things like deglazing a pan and becoming the basis of a little pan sauce. You've just finished cooking something in a pan that's left some nice fatty residue there, and you think, oh, it'd be nice to have a sauce. You can toss in a good splash of herb vinegar, scrape up your whatever's on the bottom of the pan with your fork, stir it around, cook it down a little bit, add a knob of herb butter, a little shake of herb salt, some nice freshly ground black pepper, cook it a little bit more, and pour it over whatever it is you like to pour over, including a baked potato or just some rice that you might have on the plate. And you've got the loveliest sauce going. It's really delicious. But anyway, so, oh, here comes Ned Williams. Somebody asked, he's just coming in. Someone asked who was Ned Williams. I said, that would be Betsy Williams. So anyway, it's very, very simple to make herb vinegar, and you can do this right now. All you have to do is have a nice empty canning jar like this. Take your herbs, and no, you don't have to strip them off the stem. Every single part of a culinary herb is full of flavor, including hard woody stems. So break those stems up, shove them into a jar. It's pretty satisfying, you know. There's no technique here at all. It's simply break and stuff until you have your jar. So do you see here that nice thick center stem? Full of flavor, full of nice sagey flavor. And I'll put a little bit more rosemary in there, I think, just because I want this to be. And, you know, I could also put some garlic in here if I wanted to. But I'm just filling this jar with my herbs of choice. And this is my winter herb vinegar, sage and rosemary. I don't have the time, and that's pretty full. And all I'm going to do is pour the vinegar over it. No heating, no grinding, just pouring. Pour that vinegar right up to the top. Put the lid on. And put that lid on tightly. Give it a shake. And I just made herb vinegar. 2 weeks sitting in the jar. It can be strained through a wet dish towel and a colander into a container, and then repackaged This is chive vinegar, just to show you, repackaged into a bottle, given as a gift with a label on it. This is my summer garbage vinegar. This is definitely a summer vinegar made exactly the same way, but a completely different flavor than the winter vinegar. And this is a tarragon vinegar. Before the last frost arrived, I picked the last of the tarragon, stuffed it into this canning jar, and for Christmas, I will be straining it and giving a bottle of tarragon vinegar to a friend for a Christmas present. And that's all there is to it. There is nothing more to herb vinegar than that. How long will it keep? Indefinitely. Vinegar never spoils. To this very day, and this is really true and very cool, I think, to this very day, vinegar that was packaged in Greece and was being shipped, transported across the Mediterranean to Rome or the south of France or somewhere in Italy, but packed in large amphoras 1,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago, in sealed amphoras. And an amphora is a large shipping jar made out of clay. Some of those amphoras that were on boats that were involved in shipwrecks are still being pulled from the bottom of the Mediterranean, unsealed, and the vinegar is still good. Don't ever let anybody tell you that vinegar can go bad, because it can't. One thing is, if you can allow your vinegar to brew and steep for longer than 2 weeks, if you'd like to, you can allow it to brew and steep for a month or even 6 weeks. But at the end of that time, you should strain it. The reason being, it will not spoil, but the acid in the vinegar will begin to eat at the leaves that you have in there. And your vinegar will get cloudy and a little musky tasting. So give it, no longer than 6 weeks steeping before you strain it and rebottle it and use it in your kitchen. But you can give a present just like this, with a big red bow and directions on what to do. Or maybe at the end of 6 weeks, the pandemic will be over and your friend can return it to your home and you can strain it together and have a glass of wine over it. That would be very cool, I think. Really nice. Okay, now on to, oh no, wait just a minute. Just a minute, my dears. Fruit vinegars. This is a raspberry vinegar made last summer. Now, the raspberries were fresh picked. I picked them at Russell's Orchards, which you have easy access to. And, but these days, Whole Foods, and I'm sure other supermarkets too, also have fresh raspberries, fresh blackberries, and fresh blueberries on sale this week at Whole Foods, I know. And so if you want to, you can begin a fruit vinegar. And the fruit vinegar is made exactly the same way. This is still, even though it's nice and red, this is still the white wine vinegar from Trader Joe's, poured over a jar full of a canning jar that was filled to the top with the raspberries, and then allowed to steep for several weeks before it was strained and rebottled. So that's a possibility, still a possibility. something else that you could do as a present would be to offer to friends the opportunity to come and do something in your kitchen together just as soon as the pandemic's over. One of my friends said, let's have a coming out party in the spring. And I think that would be a great thing to do. Next on your list of interesting things to make that I sent you are 2 seasoning mixes. And both of those you use already freshly dry, I mean, you use dried herbs, and all you have to do to make a seasoning mix is to go to Common Crow and buy what you need from everything that they have there. If for some reason you prefer not to go there, you can order really high quality dried herbs from Atlantic Tea and Spice Company in Truro. There's an if you're after organic things, I would go to Common Crow. They don't have, to the best of my knowledge, organic things, organic herbs, dried herbs at Atlantic Tea and Spice, but they do have good quality products at Atlantic Tea and Spice in Truro, and you can find them easily online, and there's a good chance they can get an order to you before, within the week, so that would still give you time to make things. This is a simple process that really gives you a big bang for the buck. If you can find small jars to package your mixes in, you could do a series of mixes. You could do a series of favorite blends that you might like to use in the kitchen, in your own kitchen, and tag them or label them, and again, do a flight of mixes. I mean, just do 4 or 5 of them in a pretty container of some kind, a basket. Or you can sometimes find these little bags, and you may be able to find them at Common Crow, but you can sometimes find these little bags, and they're fun you can pack, actually, you could probably package maybe probably at least 4 jars of herb blend, of different types of herb blend in something like that as a nice little hostess gift. But it's very easy to do and a lot of fun to experiment with. And these are 2 blends to get you started with all of that. Now let's turn our attentions to wines and cordials and simple syrups. Because if you are cocktail people or like to have a little bit of difference in your wine for dinner, you can easily do, here we are, you can easily make simple syrups from fresh herbs. And you can really, you can do, the supermarket will provide you with basil, dill, parsley, and cilantro in pretty decent bunches. You may, as I said before, have rosemary and sage at your fingertips outside your back door. If you have an herb garden, you probably have those there, or your rosemary's in the kitchen and the sage is outside. But a simple syrup is the easiest thing in the world to make. And this happens to be a lemon verbena. I believe this is lemon. Nope, this is a rose geranium simple syrup. Simple syrup is simply boiling 1 cup of water with 1 cup of sugar. And you can use whichever table sugar you like, the white sugar, Demerara, Florida Crystals, Turbinado. You'll get a slightly different flavor with each one of those because each one of those has a slightly different molasses component to it. White sugar has none. Florida Crystals has just a breath. The Demerara has a little bit more, and the Turbinado has the most of the molasses flavor left into it. It's least refined of those 4 sugars. But any of those will work with a simple syrup. You simply bring it to the water and sugar to a boil in a small saucepan, stir once. As soon as the liquid is clear and you see no more sugar crystals, your simple syrup is made. You put it to one side, let it cool, and package it in any way that you would like to, and it will keep forever because it's a sugar syrup and it's not going to go bad. To turn that into an herbal syrup is so much fun and so fragrant and so easy. All you have to do is the minute that the simple syrup comes to a boil, take a generous handful of whatever herb you want to flavor your simple syrup with, whether it be sage or rosemary or basil or cilantro, even parsley, mint if you can get it. And sometimes you can get bunches of mint if you can get it. And you just throw that, if you're buying it at the supermarket, take the rubber bands off, but throw that in, stems and all, do stir once, take the saucepan off the heat, put the lid on, and let it sit there for a good 15 or 20 minutes. At the end of 15 or 20 minutes, strain your syrup from the herbs that are in the pan through a very fine strainer and taste, and you'll be so delighted. It's absolutely delicious. You can have so much fun blending syrups. If you are cocktail drinkers or you know somebody in your life who loves cocktails and likes to mix all different things up together, by all means, make a series of simple syrups, herb flavored syrups that you blend, or you might add in a little vanilla, or you might add in a little spice, and and recipes for cocktails to go along with that. But once you've made it, this rose geranium, if you have any scented geraniums, if you're growing scented geraniums, look to the rose scented ones and the citrus scented ones. But there's also, if you might have, there's a gorgeous scented geranium that's peppermint that would be absolutely fabulous as a simple syrup too. But anyway, but look to those to use also to make simple syrups. But they will keep, as long as you've got them covered, bottled, they will keep indefinitely. They will not go bad. They're not going to spoil or rot on you. And they can add a lot of flavor punch to all kinds of drinks, desserts, just mixing a little in with the seltzer water is a nice thing. I have given you suggestions for flavoring wines. Sometimes if you're going to make a garlic wine or a sage wine or a rosemary wine, or even a basil wine. Sometimes if you leave the herb in your bottle of wine too long, it can get to be a little overpowering when you go to drink it. And if that happens, if you decide some night you're going to make a garlic wine, or that your garlic friend, you're going to make garlic butter and present her or him with a bottle of garlic wine at the same time, be sure to, if you are gifting wines, bottles of white or red wine that you've added some kind of herbal flavoring to, be sure to tell the recipient that they are best used within, say, 48 to 72 hours. Otherwise, it's up to a person's individual taste buds, how they feel about the strength of the garlic or the sage or the rosemary in their bottle of wine, or the basil in their bottle of wine. If that flavor gets too strong for somebody and it's tasted and it's like, ooh, this is, I don't want to drink this, do not ever throw that away. Use that wine in cooking, and boy, does it add a lot of flavor. I would not take a treasured bottle of red wine or white wine and add any flavoring to it. I would simply enjoy that bottle for what it is. But a medium to inexpensive priced bottle of a sort of rich red wine with a clove of garlic in it, added 12 hours before a meal, can really be delicious. And the same thing with the rosemary, and the same thing with the basil in a white wine or a pink Zinfandel. It really can be incredibly delicious. Now, you can, it's a little late in the year for gift giving, to begin to make any kinds of cordials or brandies. But I did give you that one recipe for brambleberry cordial. And I gave it to you because I thought, those berries are definitely available in the supermarket from Florida and California and Mexico at this time of the year. And there's absolutely no reason that you can't begin a brambleberry cordial for a friend, give it to them at Christmas and say, this is a gift that keeps on giving. Take it, put it in your cupboard, and enjoy it when you're celebrating the return of spring, because that's just about the time. You need about 3 months to allow a cordial to cure. But this is so delicious, this little brambleberry cordial, that is definitely worth trying if you have a friend who likes something on the sweet side, because this is definitely a little sweet sip meant to go into a little glass and be enjoyed at a special moment. You can find these. These are good bottles for giving vinegars in, and cordials, and specialty wines if you've already made those up. This is another recycle. This one wasn't recycled. This just came from a kitchen store. This one is definitely recycled. And I happen to have this wonderful old cork in my kitchen drawer, came across this bottle and thought, aha, look at that. Wouldn't that be just gorgeous to put a little bit of brambleberry cordial in, or one of the other brandies, because I've made several brandies this year. One of the brandies. And this is a vinegar bottle from a specialty vinegar, and cleaned and washed, and having a cork from another bottle added to it. So this would make a great presentation for a vinegar or a wine or a cordial of some kind or another. And last but not least, and I do hope you have questions or comments or suggestions, and also things that you might have done yourself that you'd like to share with your club members. Rosemary walnuts. Now, some of you may very well remember, these are rosemary walnuts, may very well remember from long ago, Victoria magazine. If you're in my age group, you'll remember Victoria magazine. And Victoria Magazine had an herb columnist by the name of Emily Tolley, who went on to write a lot of incredibly wonderful books on herb gardening. She was one of the first people to inspire Americans to go back to gardening with herbs and on a national level. And she was a wonderful cook. She did a cookbook. I've got a couple of recipes in her cookbook, actually, garlic recipes. But this is one of her recipes, rosemary walnuts. And they are easy to make. I begin, here. There we are. Sorry, I want you to be able to see these. There, all right. I begin my rosemary walnuts with a bag of walnuts from Trader Joe's. You'll find them in the nut aisle there in Danvers, if that's where you go. And it's 1 pound of walnut. I use the halves and pieces, and I think that's about $5, somewhere between $5 and $6 a bag for a pound. They're California walnuts, which I'm interested in knowing that they are. They're California walnuts. It takes probably 15 minutes to make this recipe, but they are absolutely delicious. They are incredibly useful, and packaged, they make lovely gifts. And with a little bit of a tag here identifying what's in it, they store in the freezer for forever. You just throw them in the freezer. You don't want to keep them in a cupboard. Nuts are full of oil. You never want to put your nuts in a cupboard. You always want to keep your nuts stored in the freezer, because the freezer preserves the oil. Nuts can go rancid when hot weather hits, or if there's they're in a cupboard in the kitchen that gets hot from your stove for some reason or another. The oil and nuts can become rancid, but not if you store your nuts in the freezer. I wish you were here. I wish that you could taste all of these things, and maybe another year I'll come over and just let you taste everything, and that can be part of this program, because it's hard to describe how good as well as how simple some of this is, but it is good. It's delicious, it's simple, it's easy, and doable as hostess gifts or groups of gifts to give from this holiday season. So now, questions?
That sounded so wonderful. I wish I had something good in front of me to eat.
Oh, I wish you did too.
I'm sorry, all I've got is
We
popcorn.
could begin with the rosemary walnuts and have a little sip of the brambleberry brandy. Brambleberry cordial.
I did learn something today. I didn't know to put the nuts in the freezer.
Yeah.
No wonder I hate them when I open them. Thank you so much for that.
You're welcome. That's worth it.
I so enjoyed this. Am I the only one here with you?
No, everybody's here. They're muted.
You're not the only one here.
I'm very interested in the sage wine
Oh my
that is
God, I
going to
love
keep my hair from turning gray.
Oh, isn't it wonderful?
Sparkles in my eyes.
Did you read it? I just absolutely adore that. That all came from Yule Gibbons, plus readings that I had done. I mean, I've been at this for a long time, but Yule Gibbons in Stalking the Wild Herb admitted in the beginning of his chapter on sage that he had never found wild sage, culinary sage. Sage is salvia is a big family, but the culinary sage. So he tells the story of how one day he decided he had to do something so he could find wild sage. And he happened to be standing near his neighbor's fence, and he happened to have in his hand some sage seeds. And he happened to let his hand go over the fence and oh, there go the sage seeds. And he said, I came back a few months later and by golly, there was some sage growing. So I was able to write about wild sage.
Oh, funny.
And then he went on with this wonderful sage wine, and I tracked it back. And indeed, it's a very old herbs. Every single culinary herb has a medicinal component to it. There is absolutely no question about that. So the more, in all seriousness, the more you use fresh herbs or well properly dried herbs in your everyday life, in your cooking, you are ingesting on a regular basis a broad band of antibiotic, very small, but a broad band of antibiotics every day that you use a variety of fresh herbs in your kitchen.
Mm.
And
Betsy, can I ask you the proper method to dry herbs?
you need the proper way to dry herbs and preserve the oils in those herbs. And that's what you're doing, is preserving those essential oils when you're drying them, is to hang dry them or find a place that you can lay them out. And they need to dry between, well, you can go as low as 90, a consistent air temperature of 90 to 125 degrees.
Hmm.
And the secret is in the consistency.
Mm.
So when you are drying, and the air has to be dry, but when you are drying, in an attic, if there's an attic available, on a string,
Oh.
don't worry about the dust, just worry about it being hot enough to dry during the growing season. We all are experiencing high humidity these days, much more than we used to. You guys always have humidity, high humidity. I grew up on Nantucket, so I know what it's like to live on the ocean. But here in Andover, when we first moved here years ago, we had drier summers than we're having now. Now we have much more humid summers. I'm having a hard time drying in my workshop, where I used to dry very easily, because the humidity goes up and down. So I'm now drying most of my herbs in my old oven, which is why I'm not getting rid of my stove, which is now going on 25 years old and seriously needs replacing. But by law, I can no longer have a pilot. So
Mm.
keeping my stove, but you need that 90 to 125 consistent temperature out of direct sunlight, wherever you might find it. And sometimes people think the best place to dry their herbs is in the bathroom, and that's the worst place you could possibly use to dry. In the summer, the best place, one of the best places to dry your herbs, if you have a car with a closed trunk, is your car. Spread out on clean paper or on cookie sheets or baking trays in the trunk of your car. We get a hot spell, get those herbs in there, laid out, close the trunk down. Check within 36 hours and they should be good and crispy dry. And the key is the crispness of the dryness. Wait a minute, where's my bowl? These just came out of these. Sorry, these just came out of canning jars, and this is, I don't know if you can see it, but I mean, I can pulverize them in my fingers and they're absolutely crisp dry. So here, I'll try it again so that you can see. They're absolutely crisply, fingers, if you can see those falling, absolutely crisply dry. That, okay.
Then you store them covered.
So, yeah, but they have to be in a canning jar, stored in a canning jar with that lid screwed tight. No moisture allowed. No moisture.
Mhm.
Moisture is the enemy of anything dried at all. So, any other questions?
I just actually have a comment. I loved your presentation, but I was, it's an aside, but I was very interested in what you had to say about the vinegars that had lasted so long in the amphoras from the shipwrecks in the Mediterranean. I'm a former magazine writer, and I had the opportunity to write about Anna Marguerite McCann, who
Did you
is, I think,
really?
the first woman who was involved in the salvaging of these wrecked ships. And they discovered the amphoras with the
Oh, wonderful.
vinegar and oils as well. But I think, you're right that the vinegars clearly last forever. So
Oh, and
that was very interesting to me.
yeah, no, and I love that idea that those amphora were sealed with pine tar. And the not only did the vinegar last, but the wine lasted.
Yes.
Yeah.
Might
that's-
need a few herbs, but it lasted.
Yeah, no, I know. I think it's marvelous.
Fascinating.
Who did you
Thank you.
write
Wonderful
for?
presentation.
Who did
I
you-
wrote for Bostonia magazine.
Oh, you did. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Nice magazine.
Thank you.
It was a very good magazine. Yeah. So
Dave,
That's
could,
it. Oh, go ahead.
could you give us some ideas of what to use the salted or sugar, the herb salt on, and also the sugars?
anything. Any place that you might happen to use salt, just substitute it. This all started for me years ago when, hello,
Sorry.
my husband was diagnosed with high blood pressure. And he came home and said, and this was a long time ago, because he was diagnosed very young. And he came home and said, well, I'm not supposed to use salt anymore. And I said, how can I not use salt in my cooking? Because I've always cooked. And we had three kids. And our oldest daughter at that point was 12. So this was a good long time ago. And so he said, I don't know, but I'm not supposed to use salt anymore. So when I went to the Earth Food store, which was comparable to your Common Crow in those days, I found Herba Mare, which is still on the market, which is from Switzerland, an herb salt from Switzerland. And it was very expensive, even back then. But I bought it because I thought, okay, this in those days, it was about 50% dried herbs and 50% salt. And I thought, okay, well, we'll use this. You can use this, to my husband, on your food, and we'll just use regular salt. And that went on for quite a while until he started using regular salt again. And we, of course, fell into a wrangle. Not that I happen to have my own opinions of things. Some of you may find yourself in the same category from time to time. And so we were having a bit of a tangle over the herb salt and the regular salt when our daughter, then 12, said, Mom, why don't you just use only herb salt? It was like, ding, oh, okay. So from that point on, only herb salt in this house. And then a few years later, I suddenly realized, honey bunny, you can make this. There's no reason you can't. So that's all we ever use is herb salt. And when you're doing that, you are adding those little tiny bits of herbal medicinal benefit to your cooking, as well as the small amount of added flavor. And you'd really be surprised if I think you'll be surprised if you make some herb salt and then begin using that on a regular basis instead of just plain old table salt, that you will find there's more mouth enjoyment in your food. That just that little bit of difference will add. It's not anything you're not going to say, oh, I taste, unless you make a straight, say, sage sauce, if you salt, if you made a straight sage salt. But if you make a blended herb salt, and in the summer when I actually make my herb salt for 1 year in September, and I take every herb in the garden and use that to make a year's supply of herb salt. I used every herb, and I also add into my herb salt, and in these big batches that I make, a big batch in a big roasting pan. I add into my salt 3 to 4 dried juniper berries that I end up when the whole process is done, I end up grinding those berries and stirring that ground juniper into the salt. But if you want to use juniper berries, only buy the ones from Common Grow, because do not go out into your garden and pick juniper berries. There are a lot of different junipers in this world, and I have yet to sort out, to my satisfaction, what makes one berry a culinary berry and another berry a potentially toxic or stomach upsetting berry. That I'm not enough of a botanist to have, or chemist to have sorted that out. So I just stick with store-bought juniper. But juniper is an absolutely wonderful addition to winter dishes and salt.
When you're making,
Betsy, do you add that when you're adding the herbs, or late after everything's done, after it's sat for?
Well, for the two salt recipes that I gave you,
Yeah,
are the quick ones, the ones that you can do quickly.
yeah.
If you buy juniper berries, you could grind up just 1 or 2, not a lot, for a small batch of herb salt, and just pulverize that and stir it in.
Okay.
But when I do it in a large, I make a lot of salt in a large enamel roasting pan. And I put the berries in whole and just let them sit in the salt for several weeks. And I keep layering on more fresh herbs and more, so that at the end, when I do it, I'm pulling big stems of dried herbs out, and then I sift it, and then I grind the herbs, and then I mix it all back in together. It has many more steps to it than the 2 methods that I gave you today.
All right. Okay.
Sounds
I also
wonderful.
wanted to show you, and I'm glad you talked about this. I don't know if you can see this.
Oh,
And I've had this on my counter for probably, I don't know, 40 years or more. I think it was my grandmother. And I've used it maybe once in all those years. So now I have something else to use it for.
where did it come? Tell me where it came from.
I don't know. But
Where was your grandmother from?
well, my grandmother is from Poland,
Ah,
but I don't know if it was something she brought. I doubt she brought it with her.
I
Um,
bet you
No.
did.
but she lived in Washington, D.C. and had a store. So
That's so cool.
it weighs about, I don't know, 10 pounds.
Yeah, well, this is very heavy too.
Yeah. It's all
This-
brass.
This came from Greece, and yours is very, when I spotted it, I thought, aha, they're
Yes.
very similar to each other.
Yeah.
She may have brought that, or
Or somebody else may have, who knows?
yeah, but I never used mine either. This was a gift from my father, who lived in Greece for many years. I didn't use mine until we had a friend staying here from Bulgaria, and he made his grandmother's baklava, and he just automatically picked, picked up.
My favorite food in the world.
Oh, you should have tasted it. But he automatically picked this up to mash the nuts with. And he just sat in the we have a rocking chair in the corner here. He just sat in the rocking chair for the afternoon, getting ready for his baklava, using this. And ever since then, I've used it. I thought, oh, I have to use it.
So nice.
So
Baklava
anyway,
is best frozen.
so
This was wonderful.
It was, this was a great,
well,
Yeah.
Merry Christmas to you all.
Merry
And
Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you as well.
Merry Christmas,
all of
Betsy. Thank you so much.